It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, the Detroit Symphony Orchestra and its musicians struck a new contract that was expected to expire in September. It adds new protections and benefits for its musicians. We'll be joined by the CEO and lead trombonist later on the show.
But first, on the Metro. Yesterday, we discussed the widening racial wealth gap and why it's an important issue for Detroiters. Reversing this trend will be a key factor in the push to drive economic prosperity in Detroit. And that's because home ownership is a primary avenue for wealth creation throughout America. Yet, despite historically being known for its substantial black home ownership, Detroit has only recently regained its status as a city where there are a majority of homeowners. To address this, one promising strategy is to broaden the availability of small dollar mortgages. And in light of the 2023 report released by her group on the issue, Anika Goss, CEO of the local think tank Detroit Future City, joined Stephen Henderson for a conversation about Detroit's homeownership landscape and how small dollar mortgages can make a difference. We'll continue our look at what it's going to take to drive prosperity here in the city by looking back with that conversation that he started by asking Anika to lay out why there was a need for small dollar mortgages.
2/3 of Detroiters make $50,000 or less. And what we've also seen year over year is we are no longer a home ownership city, that about half of Detroiters are renting. And we're also seeing Detroiters renting, long-term renting as well, which is what I think people are really not paying attention to. And if you're a long-term renter, meaning you have been renting the same house for, especially a single-family home, for more than 5 years, you're really a homeowner, right? And you should have a mortgage. So if you can pay rent consistently for that long. And so we've, when the majority of the city is making less than $50,000 a year, there has to be other alternatives to create wealth. And wealth is just not attached to your wage at your job, but wealth is what you can also accumulate as a household over time.
Yeah. That idea of the long-term renter and transferring that long-term status, that stability to home ownership, there are a lot of folks who don't necessarily believe that's possible, right? I think there are a lot of people who think, well, they're renters for a reason, and maybe homeownership is not for them. But of course, the flip side of that is that wealth building and generation in this country still really is about what property you can own and build on and build equity in. Talk about how we get people from that stable renting situation to that first home, and why we're having such a hard time in Detroit doing that.
Yeah. So I feel like we've spent so much time only focused on the individual household, the borrower, right, or the homeowner, when in fact the system itself is not conducive to the diversity in homeowner borrowers. So the majority of financial institutions and major financial institutions do not want to make a loan for less than $100,000. Although what we've seen, and according to this new study, much of the majority, like the vast majority of home sales in Detroit were less than $100,000. And so while some of this is, in fact, how can we move renters to homeowners, we actually have to have a system where there's enough available housing stock that's affordable, and there are enough places that are willing to lend for less than $100,000 to these kinds of borrowers that we're talking about. And there's just not enough of both of those things.
Yeah. When we talk about this issue with housing, I think we're talking about gaps, right? We're talking about, in some cases, gaps between what you need to put down on a mortgage to buy a house in some cases. We're talking about gaps in the valuation of a house that you might want to buy by a bank who might say, yeah, you want to pay $100,000 for that house, but we really only think it's worth $50,000. So you can't really buy that with a conventional mortgage. The small dollar mortgage idea you guys have is aimed at that second gap. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Well, it's less of an idea as much as we're trying to lift up what's happening in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. We're beginning to see more financial institutions, especially over the past few years, provide, whether it's a credit union or CDFIs like the Opportunity Resource Fund, or even other kinds of financial institutions that, like Rocket, for example, that are doing these mortgages. We're beginning to see an uptick in these small dollar mortgages. The purpose of the report was to really shine a light on that because it is an opportunity. Because what we've seen is Black home mortgage or Black home owners increase, which is a good thing.
Yes.
Right? And what we realize is that one of the reasons that we're seeing Black home ownership increase is because of these small mortgages. And so the more we can do of that, then the more we're able to stabilize some of these neighborhoods and the better space we can give between the renter and the homeowner in terms of moving towards back to that homeowner city.
That was Anika Goss, CEO of Detroit Future City, a local think tank, making the case for small dollar mortgages in Detroit with Stephen Henderson, as we continue our look at what it will take to increase, drive prosperity economically here in the city of Detroit.
Coming up on the Metro, we'll discuss a new book from a native Detroiter about how you can manifest a better future for yourself. This new book will be showcasing at Source Booksellers next week. Definitely want to hear about that. Stay tuned for the Metro.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham. And, sometimes, Nick, when we come into the station, I like to think, let's think positively today. Let's make sure that we're looking at all the good things that are happening, even if the sun's not shining like right now.
Complete opposite of me. I walk in here, I'm like, could this get any worse? I'm going to figure out a way.
Bah humbug all day, every day. That's Nick Austin. However, we do like to speak those things into existence, or at least I do. And for some of us who, if we can imagine it, we can really believe that something's going to happen. But how much closer does that get you to actually achieving the goals or the things that you desire? An author who graduated from Cass Tech High School and Wayne State University believes that is what it actually does. In her new book, Untapped Magic, Manifestation Methods for Living a Limitless Life, Chloe Ponta says that we all have the power to change our lives. We just don't always tap into it. To talk about this now, we have Chloe here. Chloe, thank you so much for joining the Metro, and welcome back to the Detroit airwaves.
Thank you, Tia. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, what is manifestation?
So, manifestation is when we bring something into our reality, something that we're thinking about, something that we want to have happen, a goal of ours that we want to achieve. It's come into fruition, and that becomes a physical manifestation. So that is what that is. And in my book, Untapped Magic, I talk about methods and modalities and techniques that anybody can do from any walk of life to bring in their actual goals and dreams into their world. Because we can think about something all day long, but when we actually put in the aligned, actionable steps to make that a reality, that's when that becomes real for us. And that's what I talk about in my book, Untapped Magic.
So the book uses an evidence-based proven system, like you said, with scientific data. What does that look like for you in terms of putting it all together and putting it into a collection for people to use?
So for me, it looks like when we're trying to manifest something into our real lives, we have to have something that's concrete. So it's going to take more than just willpower. And that's why I use neuroscience and psychology to also help us to rewire the way that we think so that our goals and the new life that we've created for ourselves, it becomes concrete and it becomes our new way of living. And that requires us thinking differently. So once we think in a different way, we're able to then cultivate a new way of living because we no longer have our old habits or limiting beliefs that are blocking us. So in my book, I give stories and modalities and techniques that can help the everyday person cultivate this new way of thinking. Something that probably was difficult for them to achieve seems really simple and easy once they apply the methods that I talk about in my book, Untapped Magic.
So, being a native Detroiter, I always ask people who are native to Detroit, what part are you from?
I'm from West Detroit, so I grew up off of Dexter and Joy Road on the west side of Detroit. Yeah, so I think you know about that neighborhood. And that's the area that I grew up in. So from a young age, I knew that I wanted to change my life and just live a better part of my life and just do what I could to get to where I wanted to go. And that's kind of what propelled me to look into self-development, to follow my dreams and my passions because I wanted to lead a better life. So growing up in Detroit, it definitely taught me about resilience and strength. And I think that's what helped me to become the woman that I am today.
Mm-hmm. So, Chloe, I once again hearing you're from the city of Detroit. It helped shape who you are today, and it kind of showed you or put it into practice or action some of the things that you were talking about in your book. And I think about on the opposite side, on the flip side, a little bit of the intro you heard. Some people just may not believe. Some people are just like, I'm going to go into the world, and if it happens, it happens. I'm just going to take it as it is. So, what do you say to those who may not look at the world in a way of I'm going to manifest something and actually let it happen versus just let things happen to me?
Yeah, no. And unfortunately, that's most people. Most people just kind of go through life blindly, letting life happen to them. And those are the people that, unfortunately, they don't live amazing lives because they don't believe that's possible for them. And that comes down to their worthiness, what they deserve, and what their belief systems are. And a lot of people, they loop what I call different scenarios. They may be in a different place or with a different person, but the same bad qualities, the same bad habits happen because they don't believe they're worthy of anything else. So for those types of people, I encourage them to keep an open mind. And if you're not happy with how your life is going, it's time to take a new approach, an approach that will help you to cultivate a new way of living. But again, we have to be ready. We can tell people all day long that their life can be amazing, they can have what they want, but if that person isn't ready to take action, then there's nothing that's going to change for them. So when someone's ready to actually see what's possible for them on the other side of fear, those are the people that achieve their goals, which seem like an impossible feat because they believe that they're worthy and they're deserving of having that. And that's what I talk about in Untapped Magic, is how even the person who always looks at the glass half empty can use these techniques and modalities to change their life regardless of where they are right now.
And my last question to you before I let you go, what do you want people to take away from the book? Just like you said, those who may look at the glass half empty or those who look at the glass half full. What do you want the big takeaway to be?
So my big takeaway is that you can create your own limitless life. It's totally up to you. The life that you want, it is possible. Happiness, joy, abundance, amazing health, wealth, all of those things are possible for each and every one of us. And in my book, my sole purpose is to get us back to our whole, worthy, authentic selves. As time goes on, we're in this world, we're doing our thing. We build up layers of pain and shame and trauma because we've experienced those things in our lives. And my whole sole purpose is to have us peel back those layers of pain and shame and trauma to get back to our whole worthy, authentic selves. And I believe that in my book, I can help anyone to do that when they're ready, they're called to take action, and they're looking for a change in their lives. And no matter what limitless looks like to each and every one of us, we can achieve that in some form. And that's what I want readers to take away in my book. And I hope that it changes someone's life and it can help someone to live a more limitless life.
Awesome. Joining us on the Metro is Chloe Ponta. She is the author of a new book titled Untapped Magic: Manifestation Methods for Living a Limitless Life. Chloe is a native Detroiter and Cass Tech grad and Wayne State University grad. Thank you so much for stopping by the show. And I just want to say this before I let you go. Chloe is back in town for a free author talk and book signing at Source Booksellers here in the Cass Corridor on Friday, March 15th at 7 p.m. to celebrate that book release. So definitely stop by if you can. Thank you so much, Chloe, for joining the Metro.
Thank you, Tia. It was a pleasure.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Nick Austin alongside Tia Graham. And Tia, President Biden's administration announced a new rule capping credit card late fees at $8 or requiring companies to justify a larger fee. The average credit card penalty right now is about $32. Regulators say this will save Americans up to $10 billion a year.
First things first, hallelujah, about time that we can keep a little bit of extra cash in our pockets. I mean, times are difficult right now, and sometimes, late fees happen.
Well, I don't know, man. I think somebody's parent might say, well, Tia, if you're just on track and on time with your payments, you wouldn't know anything about these.
And I would just say, oh my gosh, to my boomer parent, help me.
It's predatory. It clearly is predatory, especially taking from those who are obviously having the most trouble at the time. So let's get this back to some sense of sensibility. I mean, the penalty, what's it supposed to do?
What is it supposed to do?
Shouldn't be a profit maximizer.
Right? You're going to penalize me for being a little financially burdened right now?
You might be going a bridge too far right now with this new argument, Tia. But the point is, I know that's going to give a lot of relief to people out there. So that is wonderful. This is the Metro, though, on 101.9 WDET. I did mention that I'm here with you, Tia Graham. Tia, what do we got coming up next?
Well, right now, actually, a really cool conversation about barbershops and how they hold a special place in the hearts of Detroiters, especially Black and brown Detroiters. And, we were talking just a little bit earlier about this conversation that we're going to hear now, just about your experience growing up in the barbershop and what it meant to you. And you had like a totally different take on it.
Well, no. All right. Let's get into the conversation first. We'll hear this out and then we can cycle back in with any perspective that we want to add on. But journalist Bryce Huffman, he spoke with Authentically Detroit host Orlando Bailey about reporting he did on barbershops for Bridge Detroit and the importance of barbershops for Black men.
Just the necessity to have spaces where Black men can rest and be themselves and feel comfortable. I mean, obviously we could be at a house or a friend's house or something, but it's these public spaces for people to be at where they can rest and feel safe and just be themselves and be unguarded. And I feel like the best place a lot of us found that was either a barbershop or a church. And I mean, depending on who you were at church, you might be feeling quite judged. But barbershops have always been like that community space for people to debate about sports and talk about whatever's going on in their lives and get relationship advice, from different generations of men. So I think it's something that we were all interested in doing. Then we came back to it and we were like, okay, now is the perfect time for it. Now's the time to really explore what makes some of these barbershops stand out from one another.
Yeah, so the story features Black and brown-owned barbershops within the city of Detroit. Can you tell us how you came to choosing the barbershops that would be featured?
We actually put out a call on social media for people to give me recommendations on places where I could get my hair cut. We put out a call to figure out what barbershops people really liked, why they liked them, and we gathered a bunch of different responses from people over the course of a couple weeks, and we just kind of narrowed it down from there. We were like, we want to hit different barbershops in different parts of the city. So we hit one in Southeast, Northeast, Northwest, and Southwest.
What's really cool about the city of Detroit that it's a small city when we think about like the population, but it's a really big city when we talk about land mass, right? 139 square miles. And folks are attached to the culture of neighborhood, the culture of place, and, you know, the different culture of barbershops, right? All the barbershops in Detroit don't necessarily have the same culture. Tell me what you saw when you visited.
The thing that stood out the most about the different barbershops was they all had their own unique feel and vibe to them. For instance, we went to one in Northeast called Jefferson's Barbershop over on Ryan. That barbershop sits in a neighborhood, one of the many neighborhoods in Detroit that unfortunately has kind of been hollowed out population-wise. So this barbershop is kind of an oasis in the middle of a neighborhood where you don't really see a lot of thriving businesses. But this barbershop, you go in, and it's like this bright light of vibrancy and energy and fun. And it's something that in Detroit, you know, we don't often get to showcase or we don't often get to celebrate. So I thought that was really unique. Another barbershop we went to in Southwest, in this very crowded, you know, business district right on Verner near Clark Park, very popular, thriving area. But this barbershop, how does it stand out in an area with a bunch of different businesses and a bunch of different barbershops? Well, it stood out because when we walked by, we saw the laughter on people's faces. We saw fathers with sons. We saw people, many of them not English speakers, to be honest. Almost none of them in there spoke English. But it stood out to us because we saw that familial vibe going on inside.
That's reporter Bryce Huffman speaking with Bridge Detroit's Orlando Bailey. Bridge Detroit is one of WDET's journalistic partners. You can hear more of the interview and read the full story at bridgedetroit.com. This is The Metro.
It's Super Tuesday in the U.S. and here on the Metro on 101.9 WDET, and that means primary elections are being held in 16 states today. But even before the primaries, Americans have a pretty good idea. It will be President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump as the Democrat and Republican nominee. We will still continue to pay attention to those races as they continue, but coming up, we've got to get into another story happening a little bit more closely here. As after helping to create America's opioid crisis, pharmaceutical companies are now tasked with footing the bill for addiction treatment and crisis intervention in cities around the country. Michigan is set to receive $1.5 billion over 18 years to combat the crisis, and Detroit specifically is expected to get $40 million over the same time period. And that's important because Wayne County had some of the highest overdose deaths at 35 per 100,000 people in 2023. To talk about what Detroit is planning to do to combat and treat addiction, we have Andrea Taverna here. She is the Director of Policy and Implementation at the Mayor's Office. Andrea, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get into the breakdown of how these overdoses are affecting Detroit. About how many people are overdosing each year and how many people are dying from overdosing?
Absolutely. Last year, Detroit saw about 430 overdose deaths, and as a broad rule of thumb, for every overdose death that we see in the city, we see about 5 times as many EMS runs and about 10 times as many emergency department visits.
All right, so we do know that Michigan will get an estimated $1.5 billion, again, over the 18 years to combat the opioid crisis. How much money is the city of Detroit getting, and where will that money be going?
The city of Detroit has received about $5 million so far, and over the coming 2 decades, we expect to receive about $42 million total, as you said in your introduction.
Right.
Our strategy for using those funds is threefold. First, we're going to broadly distribute Narcan, which is a medication that can reverse an opioid overdose. So making sure that we reverse overdoses when they occur. The second piece is helping people get into treatment after they've overdosed. And the third piece is helping people reach long-term recovery by providing supportive recovery housing.
Okay, so let's take apart some of these individually. Narcan, you mentioned. In terms of distribution, how does the city plan on doing that?
Absolutely. The city has a number of outreach staff on staff already who are out in the community every day. And what they're doing is looking for locations where individuals who use substances frequent. So maybe that's motels, gas stations, liquor stores, convenience stores. Really, anywhere where people are is where we are coming to.
Okay, and you mentioned housing assistance. I think there is one of the prongs. Can you tell us how the city is planning on implementing that and what that might look like?
Of course. So we're looking to expand the supply of recovery housing. So later this year, we'll be issuing a competitive procurement looking for organizations here in the city that want to build more recovery housing beds.
Okay. And therapeutic treatments. What does it look like to get therapeutic treatments to people with this plan that you'll have?
Of course. The key gap that we see there is helping people who are using substances connect to treatment resources that are available. And what the city is planning to do is have peer recovery coaches follow up with every single person who is treated by Detroit EMS for an overdose. So they'll respond on site. They'll understand from that individual what they're interested in, what's going on in their life. And if that person is ready and willing to engage in treatment, they'll help them get to that first appointment.
You know, I think something that we hear about in this space is the idea of hot spots or places where there might be more concentration than others. Can you tell us what's considered a hot spot for overdoses in our city and how many people need to overdose or die in a particular area of the city to be more concerned about that neighborhood?
So hotspots in the city of Detroit are fluid. It depends on the drug supply at any given time. And unfortunately, we see overdoses very broadly across the city. So when I think about hotspots, I really think about the intercept points where many individuals who use substances come through that location. So I think about EMS calls, emergency departments, jails and prisons, and of course, substance use treatment providers, as well as what's called syringe service programs. So those are programs that provide safer use equipment, Narcan, other supplies to folks who use substances to try to prevent mortality even while they're using substances.
Okay. And one of the things that we're also doing when we're talking about this treatment is this distribution of funds, which you've mentioned some of the places it's going to. In reading some stories in advance of this, though, I've heard about a lot of treatment providers who say they're frustrated about the distribution of funds to what they're trying to do. Have you been able to give more funding to treatment providers in Detroit? Have you been hearing this? What's the response been from the city?
So here in the city, we luckily had a good jump on getting ready to plan how to use these funds. So even before the settlement funds came down, the city had a pretty robust opioid crisis response funded through other grants. And that's enabled us to have staff in community on the streets every day talking to these treatment providers, talking to folks who are using substances. So we felt like we had a very good foundation of understanding what the needs were in the community and being able to respond to them. I will say the system for distributing settlement funds across the state is definitely complicated. About half of the money goes to the state, about half of the money goes to counties, as well as cities and townships. So there are many different layers of government that are distributing the funds, and that's part of what contributes to that confusion about, hey, where do I go if I want to work with these dollars?
Yeah. Another thing that in terms of treatment that we've been hearing about is this idea of safe injection sites, which I know can probably respond different reactions from different folks. Though there has been a push, places where people, they say, can safely inject drugs with a medical practitioner watching them. For example, in New York, there's one that's established in Windsor. Do you know anything about how effective these are? And is there any talk of something similar happening in Detroit from your perspective?
So there is public health evidence, particularly from Canada, where these sites are more prevalent, that they can reduce overdose mortality. Here in the city of Detroit, our first principle for deciding really what programs we're going to implement, how we want to approach an issue, is listening to the community. That's always where we start. And on this issue in particular, we really haven't seen community advocacy to speak of around bringing a safe injection site to Detroit. So we're much more focused on the tactics, the approaches where we've heard from the community. This is what we're looking for. Please help us get there.
All right. Well, we'll keep paying attention to it also. This does represent a pretty big opportunity to hopefully make a dent in this issue here in the city. Andrea Taverna, Director of Policy and Implementation at the Mayor's Office, thanks so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you as well.
It's 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin, joined by Tia Graham. And Tia, what we got coming up next?
Well, coming up next, we'll discuss what a new contract means for managers and workers at the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. You all stay right there for the Metro.
It is the Metro on 101.9 WDET, where I'm Nick Austin, joined by Tia Graham.
Indeed. Just taking a quick look at the forecast today. Rainy with a high around 58 degrees. As you heard Amanda LeClaire say earlier, temperatures will fall, but not too much. We might have a break in rain between noon and 2 p.m., but otherwise do expect on and off rain until around 6 p.m. this afternoon. Wednesday, tomorrow, mostly cloudy with a high around 48 degrees, windy as well, high as 20 miles per hour. And Thursday, mostly sunny with high around 51 degrees. So seems like we're going to have spring weather pretty early here in the state of Michigan and in the city of Detroit.
That's right. And just a quick update. I know a lot of people are concerned about that industrial fire and explosions that happened in Clinton Township. Clinton Township Fire Chief says a 19-year-old man died in the explosion last night at a warehouse near 15 Mile Road and Groesbeck. 2 businesses operated in the warehouse selling vaping supplies and parts, and the fire chief says there were thousands of vape pens in the warehouse, supplies of butane, and other highly explosive materials. The fire caused explosions that started around 8:50 p.m. last night, and firefighters contained the blaze by 11 p.m. Debris was found about a mile away, and explosions could be heard as far as 8 miles away. We will continue, of course, to monitor the fallout from that, Tia.
Indeed, we will. But right now, we do have guests in the studio right now. Last month, the Detroit Symphony Orchestra and its musicians struck a new contract that was expected to expire in September. The new contract is a collaborative effort, collaborative effort between the members of the negotiations committee, which is made up of musicians and industry leaders. Joining us on the Metro to talk more about the new contract agreements and what it means for musicians is the president and CEO of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, Erik Rönmark. And also with us is the DSO principal trombonist, Ken Thompkins. Thank you both so much for joining us on the Metro.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we're going to start with you, Erik. What does this contract say about the preservation of orchestra music or just traveling musicians in general?
Well, I think that there are so many great things about having a new contract, particularly having one settled this early. This is now our 4th contract in a row that's been settled early. And even though there are a lot of great things that we've accomplished in this process, I think the process itself was what's really amazing. The fact that we can do it this early, the fact that the process itself is collaborative through mutual respect and dialogue. It really speaks about the culture that we built here over the past decade plus, and the culture that we work hard every day to maintain.
And when you talk about this culture and you just talk about the contract and the process and going through it in a very, I guess you can say, easy, smooth way, what kind of culture have you all built at the DSO in order to foster this type of relationship in order to get contracts done and agreements done in general? Ken, I'm going to start with you.
Well, basically, it's a culture of mutual respect and understanding of each other's positions. So you get to that point by constantly having conversations about the big and the small things. You know, the small things become the big things. So we have a mutual understanding of what the musicians expect, and the musicians have a understanding of what the management and the board of directors, their roles in the process. Like throughout the whole process, you know, everyone wants the priority to bring the greatest music to the people of Detroit. That's our mission. That's what we're here to do. And, you know, having a contract, a 3-year contract for the musicians is a signal of confidence that the board has in the musicians and the heritage and our legacy and our deepening commitment to the people of Detroit and our deepening relationship with our music director.
And same thing, just thinking a little bit about the culture that you all have been able to cultivate at DSO and just hearing some of the things that Ken was saying, in what ways, especially in the quote that you said actually here, this agreement affects change in vital ways that will prepare us forward artistically under, of course, your leadership and continue to support our mission, vision, and values. So how will these vital changes help continue the culture that you all have built at the DSO?
Well, I think even going back to, I mean, we've had a lot of work on this for a long time, but taking a step back to the pandemic, I think it's allowed us to really, you know, re-examine our mission, but also work on these organizational values together, collaboratively. that we feel are important, and that is what Ken was talking about, artistic excellence, but it's diversity, it's innovation, it's collaboration, and it's resilient. And I think that really speaks to what we want to do as an organization. And a contract like this, of course, there's always going to be some things that might be, more on the musician side or more on the administration side. But overall, I think what was so great about this contract is that when you look at everything that we achieved, it's all things that we want to do together as an organization. And I think that speaks to the culture.
Hey guys, Nick Austin jumping in here. And one of the things I want to know a little bit more about is the music that's going to come out of this, and specifically how we get it to a lot of folks. Because when I think about classical music, there's always this tension with kind of the gateway of getting people in, the pops you might talk about, the songs people hear, theme from Superman, or maybe something that's been sampled in a hip hop record, versus some of the classics that people talk about, like, no, if you were really real, you'd know about Shostakovich's Ninth Symphony. And so there's always this push-pull. You guys now have 3 years of working together. What does that look like for you when you're making a decision on what to put out there for the people and how to bring in the broadest audience?
Ken, we'll start with you.
Yeah.
Well, to me, everything is everything. Good music is good music. Sure. Great music is great music. So, we're pulling in audiences. Like, I don't have a prejudice. I want to hear great jazz. I want to hear great symphonic music. I want to hear great pops. I want to hear great John Williams. And that's an avenue to people appreciating Shostakovich. Great. If they're not going to appreciate Shostakovich, that's fine too. There's something for everyone at the DSO. That's why we have so many different types of programs. And all of this bleeds. I mean, it's not like it's divorced. Like when we do our classical programming, there are elements of pop, jazz, hip hop in some of the classical programming. Depending on the different composers, like we did this piece by Mason Bates several years ago that had some samples in it. We recorded a piece by Wynton Marsalis this year that had lots of blues and jazz elements in it. So these things do cross over on the concert hall classical programming.
Yeah. I got it. One more question I got to ask you, Ken, because you understand this struggle. Sometimes you'll sit down to play a piece from maybe some of the older folks there, Beethoven before then, and you're going to sit down as a low brass player, trombonist, and you're just going to see the word tacit, which means you just got to sit out for all of this portion. But, I mean, come on, you're kind of a big deal in this city. Ken, how do you prevent them from giving you these works that have you tacit so you can get out there and show people what you're doing on trombone?
It's all about advocacy.
I have to say, though, last year Ken premiered a brand new trombone concerto written for him by Carlos Simon, fantastic composer, and so I think we take a chance to feature our artists, and that means every musician on that stage in the best capacity. So but there's some Beethoven where it's not just tacit, but there's just no.
I actually do get to play in Beethoven 5 a little bit and Beethoven 6, but the piece that Carlos Simon wrote, Troubled Water, is a fantastic piece of music incorporating spiritual elements, Black traditional spiritual music into his concerto. So it was a privilege to play his concerto and have that opportunity and to expose the people of Detroit and the world through our webcast to his music.
All right, so my last question to you all before I let you go, if you could influence what's happening at other orchestras across the country, if you could just kind of give them a little bit of insight on how to work together in order to maintain and to build a culture that you're listening to musicians, but you're also listening to what management want, and you're coming to this beautiful middle ground. And it's not just orchestras; it could be any industry. How would you tell people to come to that middle ground to talk and work together, other than mutual respect? And I'm going to start with you, Erik.
Yeah. Well, I think listening to each other and understanding the perspectives that comes from this, particularly for orchestras, we're large performing arts institutions, but we're small organizations. Everyone knows everyone, and the more you understand what everyone does, the easier it is to have conversations and meaningful conversations where you actually listen to each other. And I think that's what's really happened here over the past decade or so is that, the musicians on stage understand the work that our amazing staff is doing on a day-to-day basis to get, everyone ready for that week. And the staff appreciates and understands what extraordinary talent we have on that stage, performing for Detroit audiences night in and night out. So I think it starts there.
Mm-hmm. Ken, same thing.
Well, listening and learning are active activities. And if you want to learn, you have to be humble. And I think, learning, listening, being humble, if you can grasp those tasks, you'll have some degree of success.
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you both for joining the Metro to talk more about the new contract agreements, of course, about music and your love for it, especially performing here in front of Detroit audiences and bringing that Detroit flair across the country. We were joined by President and CEO of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, Erik Rönmark, and Principal Trombonist Ken Thompkins. Thank you both for joining the show. We would love to talk with you in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET, and coming up, we'll honor the passing of Detroit chef Max Hardy and get into a little bit more about restaurants in and around the city when we continue. It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I am Tia Graham with sad news for Detroit today, actually. Chef Max Hardy passed away at the age of 40. Hardy owned and operated several restaurants in Detroit, including Coop, Caribbean Fusion. He was a talented, nationally recognized chef, so good he was a private chef for NBA star Amari Stoudemire for several years. But his impact goes far beyond his talents as a chef. Hardy was a leader for Detroit's food scene and was dedicated to improving the lives of Detroiters through food. He founded the One Chef Can 86 Hunger Foundation to combat hunger by educating the public on cost-effective, healthy lifestyles. In 2018, WDET's Ann DeLisi spoke with Chef Max Hardy about why training and community are going to be a key factor for Detroit's future as an inclusive, thriving food scene.
Being back in Detroit and having a restaurant presents a lot of different challenges. Everyone thinks of Detroit as this new food town, and I think it's becoming that. I think we're not nowhere close yet. A lot of restaurants are opening, but a lot of restaurants are opening and doing the same thing. A lot of opening restaurants and really not pushing the envelope of community and training chefs and staff right. So it's great to open these restaurants, but what about training? But those are some of the challenges, and I think as we continue to, progress as a city in the food space, I think everyone's got to be on the same accord and stop, reinventing the wheel and kind of just make it all one, kind of community. But I guess that's kind of what I'm here for.
Chef Hardy also won the Detroit Free Press Food Fighters Award in 2021 for his work mobilizing shut-down restaurants in the early days of the pandemic. Once again, Chef Max Hardy passed away at the age of 40 today.
Yeah, and it is a big week in food right now. It's one of the reasons why WDET's Ann DeLisi sat down recently with Detroit Free Press restaurant and dining critic Lindsay Green to discuss Detroit's Restaurant of the Year Classic and the changing food landscape of 2023.
I think the first thing that always comes to mind when I think of 2023 is that boom of hotel restaurants.
Right.
Just rattling off a few, I can think of the Godfrey Hotel opened up in Corktown, the Book Tower. Obviously, that project was huge. They opened with several, food and beverage establishments. Siren existed, but they've got Ash upstairs.
Right.
So yeah, lots of big projects. I think I've gotten to a place now which where I'm sort of excited about that or happy to see that we have those establishments here because, as Detroit grows, as we saw such an exciting sports year in 2023, we're bringing people into Detroit from out of town, from out of state, and it's exciting for them to have these places that they can go to when they're staying in town. But for a minute, I was a little skeptical. I was a little just like, oh man, we want our local hospitality groups to really be expanding. We want these small mom and pop kind of restaurants to be thriving. So that was one big trend that I think I noticed last year.
Did you think that less restaurants opened last year than the year prior or prior to the pandemic, if you will?
It feels like it might have been less or maybe not less restaurants, but but less upscale sit-down restaurants, I think. We did see restaurants open. We did also see a lot of restaurants that had intentions of opening but got pushed into 2024, and those were some sort of the highly anticipated restaurants, I think. But we did see restaurants opening, and they had just a different tone this year or last year. You know, I feel like the tone was flashier. It was sexier. I wrote a piece about that last year, just about the sex factor in restaurants. And I think that it maybe speaks to the times. You know, we're still kind of on the fringe of the pandemic, and I think that people are still excited about hanging out and having fun and listening to music and even in some cases dancing. And so we saw a lot of those restaurants that kind of blend the, you know, restaurant and club kind of lounge scene. So we saw quite a few of those. And yeah, just fun. More Instagram-y restaurants, you know, more of those restaurants where you're going to go and you're going to take photos and you're going to bring friends and you're going to go for birthdays. So lots of special occasion. But I think there were just less of those, just more, I guess, traditional, just going to get a great meal. Not for the theatrics, but just going for a great meal. I will say, I don't know if we had that many of those openings this past year.
So we're doing things a little bit differently this year, and we're going to do all top 10 in one day.
Yep.
And then we're going to do Restaurant of the Year.
Right.
But today we're going to do Restaurant Classic, and I love this category.
Yeah,
and
me too.
It is really nice to recognize restaurants who have been able to become a favorite for decades.
Yeah.
And to be able to stick around and still provide great and delicious food and have a loyal following.
Yeah.
So who does that award go to this year?
So that award this year goes to Cuisine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm really happy about this one. I think what's really cool about Cuisine, so they opened up in 2001. And what's really interesting about it is they were our third Restaurant of the Year ever at the Free Press.
Really?
So we started the Restaurant of the Year program in 2000. And so they were our third. And what's interesting is that they're the longest standing restaurant of our restaurants of the year. So our first two restaurants have since closed.
Oh, really?
And so what Paul Gross has done at Cuisine, really it's a testament to what he's doing because they have had the most staying power in our history of Restaurant of the Year. So it's really cool to have him back and honor him. One of the things that I found really interesting in talking to Chef Paul is that he's seen all of it. He's seen. So they opened in June of 2001, I believe it was. The intention was to get on their feet for theater season in the fall to really be up and running by September. And in September, September 11th hit.
Yep.
And being right across from the Fisher Building, that was one of the places that they were concerned about being potentially under attack. And so seeing, military forces out there, he witnessed that, Then there was the bankruptcy, obviously. There was the recession and obviously COVID. So it was really interesting to talk to him and hear just kind of the ebbs and flows of dining in general, but also just in our history. He just he saw it all and survived it all. And it sounds like he has a ton of tenacity, a lot of that Detroit grit.
Yep, absolutely.
And he was not going to go out without a fight, And so I'm really happy. Part of the Restaurant of the Year Classic category is that we have the Sylvia Rector Lifetime Achievement Award for Hospitality. And that's something that we don't give to just every Restaurant of the Year Classic. But this year, I'm really happy to be able to honor Paul with that title because he really has made a commitment to the dining scene here in Detroit. So I'm proud to be able to hand that over to him.
That was WDET's Ann DeLisi talking about Detroit's restaurant scene with Detroit Free Press restaurant and dining critic Lindsay Green on this edition of The Metro. And that's going to do it for us for Tuesday, March 5th, 2024. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast via your favorite platform.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Our technical director is Nate Bender. Music's done by Sam Bobian. Our news director is Jerome Vaughn, and our program director is Adam Fox.
Thanks for listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.